Hey everybody, I hope it's been clear as we go through Leviticus that we're not reading these ancient texts out of fear that we will become unclean like they had to be afraid. We're reading these ancient texts because they reveal what behavior pleases Yahushua. And how do you get to know somebody and see what they like and what they hate if you don't spend any time with them? This is how we spend time with Yahushua, not just by hearing his voice, but by getting fine-tuned to his voice through his word, by saying, oh, do you really feel like that, Father? Did you really hate this and really love that? And he doesn't change. The things he loves and the things he hates, the behaviors don't change. His expectations don't change. So just the way he teaches changes a bit, because back here he was doing it through a sacrificial system and a whole camp of people that he wanted to keep clean so that he could be in their midst. Well, now he's come and shed his eternal blood, perfect blood, to cleanse us, so we don't have to be afraid of becoming ceremonially unclean anymore. But we do have to be afraid of, not pleasing him. We do have to be afraid of falling down, of being deceived. It says in the last days, many people will be deceived because they did not have a love for the truth. What's the truth? The only truth in this whole universe, the only truth in either dimensions, is written down here. These truths. So what is it we're trying to find in these truths? Are we trying to find what makes us ceremonially clean and unclean? Or are we trying to find what we can do, how we can live to please Yahushua? What pleases him and what makes him angry? What makes us outside the camp as far as, running our race, as far as the way we feel, as far as separating ourselves from Yahushua. He'll never separate himself from us, but we can separate ourselves. He can turn his face and let us know through flogging and chastising and rebuking. So if you feel dreadful, don't blame unclean spirits. They're always there. They've always been there and they always will be there until Yahushua gets rid of them. Don't blame unclean spirits. We're the choosers. We choose whether to listen to them, put them in our hearts, bring them out of our mouths. What about that? The power of the tongue in our last episode. Unclean tongue. We are the ones that cut ourselves off from the presence of Yahushua, because he's love and joy and peace and overwhelming, intoxicating love and amazement. Are you feeling that in your day? Or are you harboring unclean desire? Are you entertaining wicked thoughts? Are you wanting your life for yourself because you're worth it? You're more important than him and what he wants in your day. So we finished last episode with the evil tongue. What you're doing inside yourself often manifests itself in your body, on your skin, in your infections. And of course, the world is like that today. We talked about a few of the infections last episode. Now we're going to see how to cleanse the skin infections. Yahushua said to Moshe, the following instructions are for those seeking purification from a skin infection. Those who have been healed must be brought to the priest, who will examine them at a place outside the camp. If the priest finds that someone has been healed, he will perform a purification ceremony using 2 live birds that are clean, a stick of cedar, some scarlet yarn, and a hyssop branch. The priest will order that 1 bird be slaughtered over a clay pot filled with fresh, running or living water. Fresh water or living water or running water are all the same thing. Then he will take the live bird, cedar stick, scarlet yarn, hyssop branch, dip them in the blood of the bird that was slaughtered over the fresh water. The priest will then sprinkle the blood of the dead bird 7 times on the person being purified of the skin infection. And after the priest has purified the person, he will release the live bird in the open field to fly away. Sounds very similar to the 2 goats for the atonement of the high priest, doesn't it? There's the scapegoat. One of them had to be slaughtered and the other one got to roam free out into the wilderness. This one of them gets slaughtered and the other one gets to fly away. It's like a symbolistic of substitution, The person being purified must then wash their clothes, shave off all their hair, and bathe in water. So it sounds like this is a hygienic issue, doesn't it? And Yahushua obviously knows everything. So it possibly is, but it's not for us to work out the why. It's just for us to know that he declares clean, who he declares clean, he declares unclean, unclean. So if the person's been healed, they must wash their clothes, shave off all their hair and bathe in water. Then they will be clean and may return to the camp. How exciting would that be to be allowed back into the camp? However, they must remain outside their tents for 7 days. On the 7th day, they must again shave all the hair from their heads, including the hair of their beards and eyebrows. They must also wash their clothes and bathe in water. Then they will be clean. So you can see here, and I'm going to bring this up later, probably not this episode, but shaving your head here is not an evil behaviour, is it? Shaving your beard here is not an evil behaviour. So otherwise, Yahushua wouldn't ask them to do it. Oh yes, it's because they've been unclean and they're becoming clean again, and that's the ceremony. But is shaving your beard in itself evil? Is shaving your head of itself evil? Or is it evil when done in a certain way for a certain festival with a certain group of people? I'll leave it at that for now. So the beginning stages of purification took place outside the camp. Just because a person's skin disease was clearing up, it didn't automatically make them clean. It just meant they were eligible to begin the process of becoming clean. But they weren't clean yet. This is why the priest himself also had to venture outside the camp, and he himself go to an unclean place to conduct the inspection of the skin infection. So that's interesting. The priest himself had to go to an unclean place outside the camp in order to declare whether this person was clean or not. What did Yahushua do outside the camp, near the Mount of Olives? Remember we talked about that. The whole weight of all evil and separation from the other dimension fell on him like a ton of bricks. It was the only thing he feared. He had no fear of evil or unclean spirits or anything like that. He feared being disconnected, severed from the Father, from the other dimension. And of course, he took on all the weight of everything that was evil and unclean onto him outside the camp, so that he could then appear clean, resurrected, and resurrect us from death as well. Because he was the living water. Remember, any water that was fresh or running was considered living water, and that had the ability to heal. When Yahushua referred to himself as the source of living water, he was saying that he is the only real source of purification that would never ever dry up. The 𝗓𝕗𝕗 would have instantly understood this instruction. They would have understood that he was the living water, that all health and healing could come from him. And this is in a physical realm as well. Not just, we've been made alive and made clean. We can go boldly into the throne room. Dimensions are connected within us. But physically, we can be healed as well. Physically, we can be made clean by his living water. The more life we fill ourselves with, the more of his word, the more of his Torah, the more that we are behaving, filling ourselves with his light. Because when you obey him and pass that test, you get like another bit of light in you, and he gives you another test, another bit of light, another bit of light, another bit of light. Those who are almost full of light, because we'll never be purely perfect until he returns, but those who are the fullest of light will then be transformed, will make it to the wedding feast. Those who are just delivered and still dark, those who are delivered and just stayed in Egypt, are they going to be going to the wedding feast? That's why we come to the light. We don't want to be afraid of our evil works. We want them to be exposed. This is who I am. Expose me, burn it, get rid of it, and go on to the next one. So they've been allowed back into the camp, but they're not set apart yet. They've been made clean. Remember, they've gone from unclean to clean, and in order to get to set apart, in order to be able to have offerings and be in the presence of Yahushua, on the 8th day, Each person being purified must bring 2 male lambs and 1-year-old female lamb, all with no defects, along with a glove grain offering of 6.6 litres of choice flour, moistened with olive oil, and a cup of olive oil. Then the priest will present that person for purification, along with the offerings, before me at the entrance of the tabernacle. The priest will take one of the male lambs and the olive oil and present them as a forgiveness offering, lifting them up as a special offering before me. Now, why would you need a forgiveness offering just for being unclean? Clearly, the connection was there. Disobedience and uncleanliness were connected. So you needed to be purified and forgiven. So present them as a forgiveness offering, lifting them up as a special offering before me. He will then slaughter the male lamb in the special area where purifying offerings and ascending meal offerings are slaughtered. And as with the purifying offering, the forgiveness offering belongs to the priests also. So, that's for some of their food. It is a most set apart offering. The priest will then take some of the blood of the purifying offering and apply it to the lobe of the right ear, thumb of the right hand, big toe of the right foot of the person being purified. A male child is still not a member of Israel until he is circumcised. Interesting that they're talking about the 8th day and then they're talking about circumcision, which happens on the 8th day as well. So, remember the sign of the eternal blood covenant raised up with Abraham involved circumcising every male child on the 8th day. Because until circumcised, the child is outside the camp. The child is not a member of Israel until they're circumcised. Also, what does that say to us about our immersion? I touched on this last episode. Are you truly delivered if you haven't been immersed? What does it say about being outside the camp? A male wasn't considered a part of it. And we're looking at patterns, remember? Not the ℗𝗏𝗏𝗏, but patterns. And the pattern is a male child had to be circumcised on the 8th day in order to be part of Israel. Otherwise, they're outside the camp. Anyone outside the camp was under the same judgments of the rest of the earth, the pagan nations, ℗𝗏𝗏. So to us today, if we don't go to the water and be immersed, that's when our physical circumcision of our heart happens. And we are then immersed and adopted, engrafted into the Commonwealth of Israel. Interesting. Not for us to judge, but just look at the patterns here, guys. If you haven't been immersed, are you part of Israel? Obviously, no one outside of Israel is going to be part of the bride company, because the bride company is a small part of Israel. Because Israel is anybody who's been washed in his blood. You want to be the bride? A higher calling, higher expectation. So, what were we talking about? The circumcision of a young child is outside the camp of Israel until then. Also, here on the 8th day, the infected, unclean person is spiritually resurrected from the dead. Because as far as your family were concerned, you might be gone forever if you're outside the camp, if you're sick. So the infected, unclean person is spiritually resurrected from the dead and accepted back into the camp of Israel. That would be a big party and an amazing time, that. There are many interesting connections between the purifying rituals of the unclean and resurrection back from the dead. Yahushua was also impaled outside the camp, which represented death both physically and spiritually, while inside the camp was life. Already touched on that. So then the priest will pour some of the olive oil into the palm of his own left hand, dip his right finger into the oil, and sprinkle some of it with his finger 7 times before me. 7 is the number of perfection, cycle of 7s. The 8th day is renewing, 7th day Shabbat, all those things. Patterns, remember the patterns. It's all about patterns, scripture. So if you learn the patterns, deciphering every single book that we go through from here on out is going to be easy. And Genesis, Exodus, the Torah itself, the first 5 books of Musha, are where all the patterns are given. So if you're reading all these newer books and you don't know the patterns, you can decipher anything you want out of it. But, got to know the patterns. It's all about patterns. The priest will then apply some of the oil in his palm over the blood from the forgiveness offering that is on the lobe of the right ear, lobe of the right ear, thumb of the right hand, and the big toe of the right foot of the person being purified. The priest will apply the remaining oil in his hand to the head of the person being purified. And through this process, the priest will purify the person before me. Then the priest must present the purifying offering to purify the person who was cured of the skin disease, infection. After that, the priest will slaughter the sending the offering and offer it on the altar along with the love grain offering. And through this process, the priest will purify the person who was healed, and the person will be clean. But anyone who is too poor and cannot afford these offerings may bring one male lamb instead of two for a forgiveness offering before me. So that's how you became pure of a skin infection. In our last episode, we talked about the house that was infected as well with mold and mildew. Well, this is how you cleanse the house. Then Yahushua said to Moshe and Aaron, when you arrive in Canaan, so they don't have houses yet, they're still in tents. But when you arrive in Canaan, this instruction is not relevant until Israel reached the promised land and lived in permanent dwellings of stone or mud brick. So when you arrive in Canaan, the land I'm giving you as your own possession, I may contaminate some of your houses in the land with mildew. Interesting there. I may contaminate. Do you believe that sicknesses come from Yahushua? Do you believe we are the houses now? Our bodies are the houses of his Ruach. Do you believe that he contaminates? It's just interesting. It says here, I didn't change that. I may contaminate some of the houses in your land with mildew.
The owner of such a house must then go to the priest and say, it appears that my house has some kind of mildew. Before the priest goes in to inspect the house, he must have the house emptied, so nothing inside it will be pronounced unclean. Then the priest will go in and examine the mildew on the walls. If he finds greenish or reddish streaks and the contamination appears to go deeper than the wall's surface, the priest will step outside the door and put the house in quarantine for 7 days. On the 7th day, the priest must return for another inspection, and if he finds that the mildew on the walls of the house has spread, he must order that the stones from those areas be removed. The contaminated materials will then be taken outside the town to an area designated as unclean. Next, the inside walls of the entire house must be scraped thoroughly and the scrapings dumped in the unclean place outside the town. So even when they went to Canaan, eventually you went into the land of Canaan, there was an outside the camp, there was an outside the town. And if it was a person, you had to leave your family, you were quarantined. In this case, the house, bits that were unclean had to be chucked outside the camp. Next, the inside of the house must be scraped thoroughly and the scrapings dumped in the unclean place outside the camp. The other stones will be brought in to replace the ones that were removed, and the walls will be replastered with mortar. But if the mildew appears after the stones have been replaced and the house has been scraped and replastered, the priest must return and inspect the house again. And if he finds that the mildew has spread, the walls are clearly contaminated with serious mildew. The house is defiled and must be torn down, and all its stones, timbers, and plaster must be carried out of town to the place designated as unclean.
So this is obviously before the days of exit mold and bleach. And so mildew and mold had to be, because it's a disease, and we know that you can get sick if your house is full of mold and mildew. That's why most people are really vigilant, keeping their showers and in the wet season, keeping all kinds of mold and mildew out of their homes. Because even though it's not for us to work out the whys and the science behind it, we know today that if you keep breathing in pores, and it's not just good enough to wipe it either, because the pores are still alive and they come back and you can breathe it and get really sick. So all this, we can look at it and go, oh, Yahushua knows all this, he knew all this back then. They didn't have to know it, they just had to be obedient.
Those who enter the house during the period of quarantine will be unclean, also until evening, and all who sleep or eat in the house must wash their clothes. But if the priest returns for his inspection and finds that the mildew has not reappeared in the house after the fresh plastering, he will pronounce it clean, because the mildew is clearly gone. So to purify the house, the priest must take the 2 birds, stick of cedar, scarlet yarn, hyssop brand, following the same protocols as with the unclean person, sprinkling the house with the blood 7 times to make it clean.
Interesting. I just found, it doesn't talk about it again, other than at the top there, it says, if I may contaminate your house. Interesting. Yahushua brings on us calamities, sicknesses, diseases, molds and mildews, if we are not obedient. To get our attention, just like he was getting their attention in their lives through their culture, through their customs. We have lives and cultures and customs today that are 21st century and modern, with the clothes we wear and the houses we live in and the businesses, shops, people, everything. He's getting your attention all the time. Are you having your attention got? Have you got it? Or are you being stubborn? No, you're not getting my attention. We just go on through the cycle again, cycle after cycle. How many times you want to go through around the same mountain, through the same hot wash? It's not pleasant. So we dealt with the blood discharges from a woman, menstrual and childbirth. And remember, there was nothing wrong with that. There was nothing sinful or wicked or disobedient about that. That's natural bodily functions. And it wasn't the fact that the woman had had a baby that made her unclean. There's nothing unclean about a baby. Babies were blessings. It was the fact that blood came out. So it was all about the blood. So we're going to go into more bodily discharges now, because entering into a state of impurity, i.e. from sex, semen or menstrual blood, is not the equivalent of being disobedient. That's what I was trying to say. Entering into a state of impurity, impurity and unclean is different things. You're just ceremonially impure, not disobediently unclean. Different offerings, different consequences. Entering into a state of impurity, i.e. from sex, semen or menstrual blood, is not the equivalent of being disobedient, although disobedient behaviour does result in uncleanliness. So often you might end up in the same place, but it's not the same behaviour. Then Yahushua said to Moshe and Aaron, "Give the following instructions to the people of Israel. Any man who has a discharge from his penis is unclean. Whether the discharge continues or stops, continues." It didn't make sense, but how does it stops, doesn't it? It's either brief or, it continues. What kind of because everybody's thinking it's semen, everything is, no, it's not. This first verse here is not talking about semen. It's talking about infection. So any man that has a discharge from his penis is unclean. It's not seminal ejaculation here, but a liquid discharge that flows or runs, or a syrupy thick fluid that blocks or seals the opening of the penis. So it's talking about an infection. It's not talking about ejaculate here. It's infection. Any bed he was laying on or anything he sat on, a seat or a saddle, is also unclean. Through these scriptures, we're seeing how infection spreads. Today in 21st century hospitals and things, we're all onto it. The whole idea of quarantining and viruses and people wearing face masks and, So any bed he was laying on, anything he sat on is unclean. So if you touch the man, his bed or anywhere he sat, or if he spits on you, I thought that was funny. What's he spitting on you for? Or if he touched you without washing his hands, you must wash your clothes and bathe yourself in water, and you must remain unclean until evening. So even if you touched him, or if he touched you, you're unclean until evening too. Any clay pot the man touched must be broken also, because it's porous, and any wooden utensils he touched must be rinsed with water. And when the man with the discharge is healed, he must count off 7 days for the period of purification, before washing his clothes and bathing himself in fresh water, so that he'll be clean. Fresh water. And he's clean. Did you remember these things now when Yahushua healed somebody and he said, "Go and wash yourself in the river"? I can't remember now. There's many times that, and of course our own immersion. I always had that question, why immersion? Why do we have to be immersed? Why was Yehukanon immersing people in water? Why didn't he just preach to them and have them receive it? And yes, I receive you. And I know he was preparing people for the rain. Repent, for the rain of Yahuwah is coming. But why immersion? Well, when you understand Leviticus, you understand the whole purpose of ritual cleansing. This was to cleanse them in preparation for the rain, for Yahushua. And of course, after Yahushua came and died, the immersion was to enter the rain through the immersion. So, symbolic and through obedience. So, all this is fascinating because we're learning the patterns. That's what this is about. It's not about us disregarding all this because it's not relevant to us. Nothing we do now can make us unclean. We're washed in Yahushua. We claim the blood of Yahushua. Yeah, great. But by learning these patterns of behaviour and patterns of lifestyle, we learn how to live today. The behaviours that are relevant. So I'm going to keep saying it because the patterns are phenomenal to me. I love patterns. In my job as a hairdresser, I use patterns all the time. And if you do the right pattern and you do it properly, the haircut looks great. If you just do something mad and creative and cosmic, dog's breakfast. It's hideous. So do the patterns. Chefs use patterns. Recipes when they cook brilliant dishes. Dressmakers use patterns. Most houses, architects, they're using patterns. Everything that is successful in life uses a pattern. And look here, we have patterns. But through our upbringings and religious and everything, we weren't taught the patterns. So, lost the point. Where are we up to? I think we're up to there. On the 8th day, he must get 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons and come before me at the entrance of the tabernacle and give his offering to the priest, who will offer his bird for his purifying offering and ascending the offering through the process. Through the process, the priest will purify the man before me for his discharge. So that is just from an infection, from the groin or from the penis. That's just an infection, an oozing infection. So whenever a man ejaculates semen, he must bathe his entire body in water. Well, just like the woman wasn't doing anything disobedient by having a menstrual cycle, ejaculating semen when you have sex is not disobedient either. Ejaculating onto the ground or into your own hand, or doing it yourself, that is unclean behaviour. But doing it into a woman, or through a nightly emission in a dream that was not your choice or choosing, that whenever a man ejaculates semen, he must bathe his entire body in water, and he will remain unclean until the next evening. Any clothing or leather with semen on it must be washed in water also, and it will remain unclean until evening. After a man and woman have sexual intercourse, they must each bathe in water, and they will remain unclean until the next evening also. This was interesting. If a Israelite soldier has sex with his wife on any given morning, he is prohibited from fighting in battle that day, because it was a set-apart war, and it was forbidden for the unclean to come into contact with the set-apart. Interesting. And this was important because it's a set-apart war, and if you didn't do it right, you might lose the battle. Yahushua had to be with you when you went out to battle. So when a man has an abnormal discharge, he is required to fully immerse himself in living water flowing. However, if the same man has a normal seminal discharge, the water he immerses himself can be a mixture of mostly regular water with living water added to it. For most of the surrounding nations, sex was a normal and customary part of their rituals, usually connected to fertility rites. However, Yahushua took strong measures to ensure that anything connected to human sexuality or human reproduction was barred from his set-apart grounds. It's interesting, isn't it? Sexuality and masturbation and, anal sex and nudity, whatnot, seductiveness was all involved with the priests of the pagan nations and their temples and everything. But Yahushua is different. He's kept it away. So if you've done any of those behaviours, you have to be out of the set-apart relationship while you've done that. Interesting. Doesn't show us that by having sex with our husbands or wives we become unclean, but it shows us that sexual behaviour is very important to Yahushua. It has to be done correctly. It doesn't cut us off from him, but if he's involved in it, the behaviour of sexual intercourse is only to occur with a man and his wife, a wife and a husband, and Yahushua is involved in that marriage covenant. That's the only time it's set-apart behaviour. Doing it of yourselves, doing it with the same sex, doing it with the animals, doing it with anything like that, he's not involved in that, and it's unclean. So it's not unclean, it's an abomination that he considers an abomination. So while nothing today can make us unclean, if something is an abomination, do you think you're going to be allowed into the wedding doing those sort of things? So I don't believe anybody with the true ruach of Yahushua inside them would be doing those behaviours, homosexuality, LGBT, religion does those things. It's lifted up and held it, gay priests and all sorts of things, and all that sort of thing, the clergy and everything. But that's the world. We're talking about Yisrael, and we're talking about Yahushua's bride. Not Israel, Yisrael, those immersed in Yahushua's name, with his ruach inside them. And those definitely going for the bridal company, don't partake in those wicked behaviours. Otherwise, they'll feel like death. And you either go back, like a dog goes back to its vomit, or you pull your socks up and go, oh gee, I can't do that. I feel like death. I'd rather be dead than do that again. So that's what he shows us through his flogging. You're not in the nations anymore. Don't behave like them.
So whenever a woman has a menstrual period, she will be unclean for 7 days, and anyone who touches her during that time will also be unclean until evening. Anything which a woman lies on or sits on during the time of her period will be unclean. If you touch her bed, you must wash your clothes and bathe yourself in water, and you will remain unclean until evening too. If a man has sexual intercourse with her and her blood touches him, her menstrual impurity will be transmitted to him also, and he will remain unclean for 7 days also. And any bed on which he lies will be unclean too. If a woman has a flow of blood for many days that is unrelated to her menstrual period, or if the blood continues beyond the normal period, she is unclean. As during her menstrual period, the woman will be unclean, as long as the discharge continues. When the woman's bleeding stops, she must count off 7 days. She will be clean. On the 8th day, she must bring 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons and present them to the priest at the entrance of the tabernacle, and the priest will offer one for a purifying offering and the other for an ascending meat offering. Through this process, the priest will purify her before me for the impurity caused by her bleeding.
So we can see why we are unclean today. Blood is important to Yahusha. Blood makes us unclean. Seminal fluid makes us unclean. You don't go, you wash things that's on. It doesn't make us spiritually unclean, but it's germy. It's unclean, So you shouldn't leave all those things lying around. Anything with blood on them, anything with semen on them, it shouldn't be semen on anything anyway. Maybe a sheet here or there, but everything has to be washed and purified, because today in our mind, as far as knowing what contaminates things and germs and everything, bodily fluids contaminate things. So if you look at this, you can see Yahusha's teaching us how to be clean, not just spiritually, but in this dimension, clean. Don't leave things with blood on them lying around. It's disgusting. Don't leave things with ejaculate on them lying around. It's disgusting. Bodily fluids are disgusting. That's what Yahusha's really saying. It makes you unclean. It can't cut you off from his presence, but it makes you dirty. Be clean. Now, given that your average modern woman today menstruates about 450 times in her life, I suspect many ladies imagined things were quite difficult for the Hebrew women, who had to regularly go through all of the rituals detailed in the Torah. Did you ever think about this? If you had to wait 7 days and offer up these animals, a woman had to do this all the time because of her menstrual cycle. Anytime a man and woman had sex, they had to do this. Well, it wasn't like that. However, your average Israelite female didn't have to deal with regular menstrual cycles, for she was normally married off very soon after puberty, and very soon after that started having children, many children. It was also a normal practice for the Hebrew women to continue nursing, breastfeeding her child up to the age of 3, and in some cases even up to the age of 4 or 5. And a nursing mother, as most people know who've had children, a nursing mother doesn't usually have regular periods. It's very hard, not impossible, but hard to fall pregnant while you're breastfeeding, because your body is kind of just allowing you to do one thing at a time. It's kind of a way to stop having stacks of children all on top of one another. You feed them, and then you can fall pregnant again. So a nursing mother doesn't usually have regular periods during that time, so she doesn't become unclean or impure, and thus wasn't subjected to all the purity rituals. A typical modern woman's experience is far removed from the typical ancient Hebrew woman's experience. And we know that. There's all sorts of This is how you will separate the people of Israel from being unclean. Otherwise they will die. So it's pretty serious. Pretty serious. They will die. For the impurity would defile my tabernacle that stands among them. So this is about his set apartness. And remember, he ain't letting nothing defile his set apartness. He will zap anything before he gets defiled. It's the same thing. He will not be defiled. And that's why he himself had to die to bring us close to him, so that we can come openly and boldly to him now, and it won't defile him because his blood has washed us clean. So the priests have to separate themselves, separate the people of Israel. That was their job. always separating things. Clean and unclean, pure and impure. Aaron definitely understood this, didn't he? After a couple of episodes ago, his sons were struck dead, so the fire consumed them because of their fast around in the tabernacle. So Aaron really understood this, which is probably why Yahusha allowed that to happen to his two sons. So that from the very week of the establishment of the tabernacle I should say, Aaron understood through this harsh, I will not allow my set apartness to be defiled. Through those who come near me, I will be set apart, thank you very much. And if you don't treat me as such, watch out. Oh, this was brilliant, this bit. Remember the woman with the unusual discharge of blood who touched Yahusha's tzitzit and was healed? Remember her? Pushed through the crowd, and she had an unusual flow of blood. She'd been to all sorts of doctors and, witch doctors, whatever, that she'd been there and couldn't find any healing. But she thought, if I only touch him, that was what her belief was like. If I only touch him, we just think, oh, she had belief. Let's read on. Instead of her being punished for making Yahusha unclean, because remember what we've just read? If you touch anybody that's during having a menstrual cycle, if you touch any man who's had semen, if you touch any man or woman in that state, you become unclean. And you've got to go outside the camp, you've got to be out there too. So imagine in Yahusha's time what the religious authorities would do if you have a flow of blood and you intentionally went up to someone and touched them and made them ritually unclean. You very well could be killed because you did it intentionally, an intentional crime. You could be very well dragged out and stoned. So instead of her being punished for making Yahusha unclean too, she was instantly healed by the power of the living water. The only way you could be healed was by being bathed in the living water, remember? So instead of her making Yahusha unclean, he instantly, even without him knowing, because he was the living water, zapped her and made her clean. So instead of her making him unclean, she was instantly healed by the power of the living waters of purification, live in the flesh. And she was rewarded for her belief. How phenomenal is Yahusha? And he allowed him to lead us in our day, to do everything. But we are the choosers. He's opened the doorway and he's now waiting for us. Until the end, of course, when he won't be waiting at all. It'll be either, well, you allowed me to know you, and you know me and I know you, and I want to be married to you because you are almost perfect. You've tried your whole life to be almost perfect, and now you will be perfect.